The first letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped beneath the gilded doors of the Sterling mansion like a dead leaf carried by an indifferent wind. It had no postmark, no return address, no identifying marks of any kind, only a single date stamped across the envelope in ink that seemed to shimmer when the light hit it just right. The date was 3 days in the future. My brother, Adrian, laughed when I showed it to him. He was the eldest, the golden child, the one who had inherited our father's ruthlessness without any of the accompanying guilt. "Someone's playing a game," he said, tossing the letter onto the mahogany cable. "Probably one of your charity cases, trying to rattle us." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I opened the letter that night, alone in my study, the weight of the mansion pressing down on me like a physical presence. The message was brief, clinical, and utterly devastating. Adrian Sterling will die on Thursday at 7:42 p.m. Heart failure. He will be alone in his penthouse, surrounded by the trophies of a life he never deserved. I dismissed it as a cruel prank. I told myself that it was the work of a disgruntled employee, a rival, someone who wanted us to suffer. But when Thursday arrived and Adrian collapsed in his penthouse at exactly 7:42 p.m., surrounded by the artifacts of his hollow existence, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. The doctors called it a freak occurrence. They said his heart had simply stopped, that there was no underlying condition, no warning signs, no explanation. I knew better. The letter had not been a threat, it had been a prophecy. And the prophecy had come true with a precision that defied every law of physics and probability. I was terrified, not because my brother was dead. Adrian had been a monster, a man who had destroyed countless lives with his greed and cruelty. I was terrified because the letter had been right, and if it had been right about him, it would be right about the others. The second letter arrived the morning of the funeral, tucked inside the folds of the black suit I had laid out for the service. I found it while dressing, my hands trembling as I unfolded the crisp white paper. "Eleanor Sterling will die on Saturday at 3:15 p.m. Anaphylactic shock. A single bee, drawn by the fragrance of the lilies in her garden, will seal her fate." I wanted to scream. I wanted to burn the letter, to pretend I had never seen it, to believe that it was just another cruel coincidence. But I knew better. I had seen the precision of the first prophecy. I had felt the cold hand of destiny closing around my family's throat. I locked my mother in her room. I sealed every window, every door, every crack in the walls of her suite. I filled the room with industrial-grade insect repellent and made sure there was not a single flower within a mile of the estate. And still, at exactly 3:15 p.m. on Saturday, a single bee, a bee that had somehow survived the chemical assault, a bee that had somehow found its way through the sealed HVAC vents, landed on my mother's neck. She died in seconds, her face swelling, her body convulsing, her eyes fixed at mine with a look of utter, devastating betrayal. I had failed. I had tried to outrun fate, and fate had won.
The third letter arrived the next morning, delivered by a courier who had no memory of where the package had come from. I opened it with shaking hands, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Marcus Sterling will die on Monday at 11:59 p.m. A car accident on the Brooklyn Bridge. The brakes will fail. The water will claim him. Marcus was my younger brother, the only one I had ever truly loved. He was the kind one, the gentle one, the one who had tried to escape the poison of our family's legacy. He had moved to a small apartment in Brooklyn, far from the mansions and the power, trying to build a life that was his own. I called him immediately. I told him about the letters, about Adrian, about our mother. He laughed at first, dismissing it as the paranoid ramblings of a grief-stricken brother. But when I told him about the bee, the sealed room, the impossible precision of it all, his laughter faded into a silence that was more terrifying than any scream. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't drive," I said. "Stay home. Lock your doors. I'll come to you." I drove to his apartment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I stayed with him through the night, watching the clock tick toward midnight, waiting for the disaster that I knew was coming. At 11:58 p.m., the power went out. The building plunged into darkness. I heard a crash from the street below, the sound of metal tearing, glass shattering, a car hurtling out of control. Marcus ran to the window, and I followed. We watched as a drunk driver, swerving to avoid a stray dog, slammed into the parked cars outside the building. One of them, a sedan with faulty brakes, rolled backwards, gathering speed, heading straight for the entrance of the building. I pulled Marcus away from the window. I told myself we were safe. The car couldn't reach us. We were on the 3rd floor. But I had underestimated the nature of fate. The car didn't hit the building. It hit the gas main on the street corner. The explosion was instantaneous. The shockwave shattered the windows, sent us flying across the room, and buried us beneath a mountain of rubble. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, my body broken, my mind reeling with the horror of what had happened. Marcus was dead. The letters had claimed him too. The prophecy was relentless. It was inevitable, and I was the only one left. I spent the next week in a haze of grief and rage. My entire family was gone. My mother, my brothers, everyone I had ever loved, everyone I had ever hated, everyone who had ever been part of the Sterling legacy. The letters had destroyed them all, but they had spared me, and I needed to know why. I hired a team of forensic experts, cryptographers, and physicists to analyze the letters. They worked around the clock, examining the paper, the ink, the handwriting, the postmarks that didn't exist. And they found something that changed everything. The letters were not from the past. They were from the future. The ink contained traces of a rare isotope that had not been synthesized in any laboratory on Earth. The paper was made from a composite material that wouldn't be developed for another 30 decades. The handwriting, upon deeper analysis, matched a sample that had been taken from my grandfather's journals that had been buried in the family vault for over 50 years. My grandfather, Victor Sterling, had been a man of legend. He had built the empire from nothing, a self-made titan who had ruled the business world with an iron fist. But he had also been a man of secrets. He had funded research into quantum physics, time manipulation, and the nature of consciousness. He had died in 1995, supposedly of a heart attack, surrounded by the family he had built. But the letters suggested otherwise. The letters suggested that Victor Sterling had not died. He had transcended. He had found a way to project his consciousness into the future, to observe the consequences of his actions, and to intervene in the timeline to correct the mistakes of his legacy. And the mistakes were us, his children, his grandchildren, the monsters he had created. The letters were not prophecies. They were corrections. They were the instruments of his revenge against the family that had betrayed his vision.
I traveled to the family vault in the mountains of Colorado, a place that had been sealed since my grandfather's death. The vault was a fortress of steel and concrete, hidden beneath a mountain that had been hollowed out by generations of sterling ambition. Inside, I found the remnants of my grandfather's research, papers, prototypes, and a single machine that hummed with an energy that felt older than time itself. The machine was a quantum temporal projector, a device that could send information into the past, into the future, across the fabric of reality itself. My grandfather had built it to save his legacy. He had used it to send the letters, to eliminate the branches of his family tree that had become corrupted by greed and cruelty. But he had made a mistake. He had not accounted for the paradoxes. The letters were not just sending information, they were creating a closed loop, a cycle of causality that was collapsing in on itself. The machine was not just projecting messages, it was projecting consciousness. My grandfather was trapped inside it. He was living every moment of his existence simultaneously, watching the consequences of his actions unfold across eternity. And he was trying to escape. I stared at the machine, my mind reeling with the implications. My grandfather was not a ghost. He was a prisoner of his own ambition, a prisoner of his own revenge. And I was the only one who could free him. The machine spoke to me, not in words, but in images, in emotions, in a language that transcended the boundaries of human communication. It showed me the future, a future where the sterling legacy had become a cancer on the world, a future where the family's greed had triggered a global catastrophe that would kill billions. It showed me the massacre that my grandfather was trying to prevent, the bloodshed that would be unleashed if the sterling line continued unchecked. And it showed me the truth about my grandfather's revenge. He was not punishing us for our sins. He was trying to redeem us. He was trying to give us a chance to break the cycle, to choose a different path, to become the people he had always hoped we could be. But the letters had failed. The prophecies had failed. The revenge had failed because we had refused to learn. We had refused to change. We had refused to break the cycle of hatred and greed that had consumed our family for generations. And now the cycle was collapsing in on itself, threatening to destroy everything. I made a decision. I would not let the cycle continue. I would not let my grandfather's revenge consume the world. I would break the cycle myself. I destroyed the machine. I didn't just shut it down. I dismantled it, piece by piece, ensuring that it could never be rebuilt. I burned the letters, the journals, the research. I erased every trace of my grandfather's work from existence. And then I walked away from the vault, the mountain,
the legacy that had defined my family for generations. The revenge was not complete. It would never be complete, because revenge, I had finally learned, is a cycle that feeds on itself. It consumes the avenger as surely as it consumes the avenged, and I was tired of being consumed. I spent the next decade rebuilding my life. I sold the remnants of the Sterling Empire and donated the proceeds to the causes that my grandfather had tried to protect. I became an advocate for forgiveness, for redemption, for the power of breaking the cycle. I spoke to audiences around the world, sharing my story, my pain, my transformation. And I found a peace that I had never thought possible.
The final twist came 10 years later, when I received a letter in the mail. Not a prophecy, not a threat. A letter that had been written in my own handwriting, dated from the day of my grandfather's death. Marcus, if you're reading this, you've already done what I could never do. You've broken the cycle. You've saved the future. I am proud of you, not because you destroyed the machine, because you saved yourself. I was wrong to try to control destiny. I was wrong to manipulate the timeline. I was wrong to seek revenge. But I loved you. I loved you more than I have ever loved anyone, and I hope you can forgive me. I read the letter 100 times, each time feeling the weight of his words. My grandfather had not been a monster. He had been a man who had tried to save his family, even if his methods had been flawed. And in forgiving him, I had finally found the peace that had eluded me for so long. The letters from tomorrow had been a curse, but they had also been a gift. They had shown me the future, the consequences of my actions, and the power of choice. They had given me the chance to break the cycle, to build something new, to become the person I was always meant to be. And I had taken that chance. I had chosen redemption over revenge. I had chosen forgiveness over hatred. I had chosen hope over despair. The revenge was not against my family. It was against the cycle of destruction that had consumed them. And in breaking that cycle, I had finally found freedom. I never spoke of the letters again. I never spoke of the machine, the vault, or the prophecy. I let the past fade into the shadows where it belonged. But I never forgot, and I never learned. The letters from tomorrow had taught me that the future is not fixed. It is shaped by the choices we make in the present. And I had made the choice to be a better man. I died in my sleep at the age of 87, surrounded by the love of a family that had nothing to do with the Sterling legacy. I had broken the cycle. I had ended the war, and I had found the peace that my grandfather had spent his entire life chasing. The letters were gone. The machine was destroyed. The prophecy was silenced. But the lesson remained, that revenge is a prison, and the only way to escape is to forgive. The story of Marcus Sterling became a legend, a cautionary tale about the cost of hatred and the power of redemption. But for me, it was something simpler, a beginning. A beginning I had never thought I deserved, and a future I would build with my own hands, one truth at a time. The empire was gone. The fortune was gone, the family was gone, but I was still here, and that, in the end, was the most powerful revenge of all.
I was the last of the Sterlings, the last of the bloodline that had shaped the world, and I chose to end it not with destruction, but with peace. I chose to let the legacy die. I chose to let the cycle break. I chose to let the future unfold without the weight of the past. The letters from tomorrow had been a warning, but they had also been a gift of clarity, of purpose, of the chance to choose a different path, and I had chosen wisely. The revenge was complete, not because I had destroyed my enemies, because I had saved myself, and in saving myself, I had become the hero of my own story, the hero who had broken the cycle, ended the war, and found the peace that had always been within his reach. The letters were silent now. The machine was dust. The prophecy was fulfilled, and I was free. Truly, completely, utterly free.